In simpler terms, I wanted just to die, but not to quit serving God.
Who's going to call the family and tell the family that the patient is correct?
I couldn't handle it anymore.
What have I done? What did I do that a God like you would love me too? That a God like you would save me too? With tongue-in-cheek, it is said that when a lawyer makes a mistake, his client may end up in prison. When a doctor makes a mistake, his client or his patient may end up in the grave. Fact of the matter is that we all make mistakes from time to time, and those mistakes can sometimes have a very negative impact on our lives or the lives of somebody else. Today we're going to listen to the story of Bigboy Miller and how the impact of a mistake of somebody else had an influence on his life. But fortunately this influence was a positive one. It ended up in him having a testimony that he can share with all of us. Let us listen to Bigboy.
I'm the eldest son at home. I was born and bred in Vryburg, a small town in the olden Northern Cape, currently now the Northwest Province. I'm 52 now, happily married with a beautiful wife. I've got 4 kids. Eldest son is 28, second born is 25, third born is 21, and my fourth born is 15 years old. Let me say, my whole life, I was a sport person. I was a football player. I'm working for the South African Police Service. I represented the South African Police Service 4 times in the national championships as a soccer player. My eldest son was doing matric in 2009. In September, we went to Vryburg for his matric farewell. We came back the weekend. The Monday after that, I became sick. Then I was hospitalized. On arrival at the hospital, the doctor indicated to me that it's appendix that is giving me problems, and that within 20 minutes, he would have then removed it. But 2 hours or 3 hours later, I was then out of the theater, where the doctor informed myself and my wife that the appendix stuck in the back of in my back. Hence, he struggled to get it out. But it seems in the process, he cut some of my muscles as he was trying to remove the appendix.
They discharged him and he went home. But then he ate an apple and then complained about pain, so I had to take him back to the hospital. So when we got to the hospital, the doctor that actually operated him was not there. So they called another doctor. So that doctor now saw that his intestines got rotten. So they had to admit him again.
I had an open wound, a long cut on my stomach. The wound couldn't close. The one doctor took over from another doctor. For 3 months I was in the hospital for rehabilitation, but I couldn't talk. I even lost my memory. 5% of my memory I lost. I couldn't talk, I couldn't write, I couldn't walk. I was just lying there in bed.
And the doctor called me and told me that there's a possibility that they have to cut a hole in his throat because his lungs are busy collapsing. And at that time I started praying and asked God that they mustn't cut the hole in his throat. So I remember I went home and called my brother and started crying and told my brother, listen, there's a possibility that they're going to cut a hole in his throat. And then my brother asked me, listen, where's your faith? You have to go on your knees and start praying. I just start praying every day. So every night when I came home, there was the song that I'm listening to, In the Shadows of the Lord. So when my boys went to bed and they are finished with their homework, that is when I will now sit on the computer listening to this song and crying and start praying. And I did ask God that please don't take him away from me because I'm still too young to be a widow. And my kids were still very small because the two of them were still in school. And that's when I asked God, just give him back to me the way he is. I will take care of him no matter what. It doesn't matter in what shape he is, how he looks. If he can't do anything for himself, I'm prepared to look after him, and as long as it's going to take for him to recover. It was the most difficult time of my life. But it was also the time that I actually prayed the hardest ever in my life. I prayed every single day, even if I went to bed crying and praying. But somehow, some way, I know that God will answer my prayers.
But in these 3 months while I was in hospital, there was a stage, a day that I cannot remember up until today, where the nurses gathered around my bed. And the discussion was that the one senior nurse, if I may put it that way, asked those that were standing along with her that, listen here, the patient has cracked. Who is going to phone the family? And none of them answered the question that was asked. They closed the curtains around my bed. And as you know, hospital curtains don't really close. I could peep through the curtains and saw them where they were standing at a station, at a nurse's station. So while they were standing there, I could notice that the doctor was standing with them. So what happened, I could see that there was a discussion. They were talking about, probably about me, or probably they were giving the doctor information about other patients in hospital. But that moment, there was a stage where the pains went out of my body and it became dark. Dark in the sense that if you would put your hand in front of your eyes, you wouldn't have seen it. So I was like walking in this darkness, in a direction that I don't know. I couldn't see any light, I couldn't see anyone, but I was just walking. And I think after a couple of minutes or seconds, the machines went on. And then it made a noise that attracted the doctors and the nurses to come back to my bed. They opened the curtains and the pains were back again. But in that process, before this darkness, because of the pain also, I said a short prayer and I said to God, in your hands, God, I present my soul. I really can't tell where the prayer came from, why I would have said such a prayer. But I guess it was because of the pains that I went through. It was really painful. But you know, this doctor took over and he started to work with me and started to change medications, the instructions to the nurses. At a certain stage, I was isolated, put in a separate room alone. When my family came to visit me, they were supposed to, put aprons on, plastic aprons, put gloves. I had a very short breath, couldn't talk for long. There was a stage that I wanted to write a message to them because I couldn't talk. I wrote on a piece of paper, but if you can see it, because my sister-in-law went and she laminated the piece of paper, you can see that I wasn't from I wasn't normal. But while I was isolated and the days passed, I became better, still with an open wound on my stomach. I instructed my wife to bring my Methodist hymn book.
And I asked him, how do you know you're going to come home? And he asked me, where's your faith? I'm coming home. You must just bring my books. I'm telling you that I'm coming home. So that was, being after 3 months, going to the hospital like every day of your life, it was such a relief. And I couldn't thank God enough for healing him and getting him out of ICU. Because there was a time that I thought that he will never get out of there. I even called once his brother, because it seems like my in-laws didn't realize how serious he was in the hospital. So this one day I called him and said, please, if you really want to see your brother while he's still alive, I think you must really come to the hospital, because I don't think you realize how serious he is. So that night my brother-in-law was actually crying. The next day he told me that he didn't believe that Bigboy will make it. He was asking his wife, listen, do you think he will make it?
I would sing in the ward alone, in my room alone. I think it's hymn 516, when you walk with the Lord. I could hear people that when I was singing this song, when they passed, they would say, this person is becoming mad now. But at that stage, I knew that, you know what, I'm talking to my Creator, because I really wanted to be healed, or either to be with Him, because the pain I couldn't handle it anymore. It was really painful. But my eldest son, shared with me that one day my father visited the hospital, where he felt my feet, and he shared with them that when a person is passing on, your feet becomes cold. And apparently it was what happened when he came to visit me in the hospital. My feet were cold, and all of them believed that I was going to leave them.
And the most exciting part is when he told me he died. They closed the curtains and I asked, who are they going to call? Who's going to call the family and tell the family that the patient is correct? And then he told me that he was just breathing like 3 times deep, and then the machines went on again.
As a human being, you start to fear for things that will really never take you to heaven. You fear for your kids, you fear for your wife, you fear for your family. At a stage on that question, I feared that am I really going to make it to heaven? And that was one of the critical moments in my life, that am I ready to go? Although I said to God, in His hands I present my soul. But that doubt in me was still there to say, am I really going? If I had to pass on here, will I really see heaven? Did I live my life according to what Jesus Christ wanted me to live my life? And that was the biggest fear. I wanted just to, in simpler terms, I wanted just to die. But not to quit serving God. The pain was too much. Hence I said, in His hands, I present my soul. What kept me going is I believed that, 2 things must happen. Either I must go to God, although I had my own doubts, not in God, but in myself, or I must get healed so that I can be with my family. Because at that stage I didn't have grandkids, but I wanted to be with my family. That kept me going. But to be afraid, I was so afraid. It's something that I cannot describe. But in a sense, I think being frightened, it was because of the pain that I went through. Every time when I think of of the pain that I'm going through, you know, I will become so frightened that I came to this conclusion to say, God, take my life. Let me rather be with you or let me heal. I can't even recall that I could have counted the days. Only after I was hospitalized that I noticed that I was 3 months in hospital.
I remember when he came out of the hospital, he was so thin and he didn't have any energy, so he couldn't do anything for himself. I remember there was one day when I was still at work, he tried to bath himself, so he almost drowned. And then he called me and said, I must please come and help him. So I asked him, how can you go into the bath by yourself and you know you can't do anything for yourself? That is when I decided I'm going to quit my job and rather look after him. What I realized is that at work they can replace me very easily, but they can never replace my husband. And that is what I always told him. He is more important than my job. I can get another job tomorrow or whenever I need it, but I won't get another husband. I won't get that specific person anymore when he's not there anymore. And they won't provide for us like he do. So for me it was, I just told that people that, listen, my family and my husband is now more important than anything in my life. I'd rather sit at home and look after him until he's fine.
I believe that if I didn't have faith, like, the question of emotions is, do you really believe that God could have taken me out of the situation? And even now, when I think back, it's really emotional. My eldest son was matric, and all these blessings that I've got now, if I had to die in 2000, I would have really not seen those things, those blessings that God has given me now. Hence it's important that, you know, we must serve God.
I will just tell him that they must never give up and they must keep on praying. And they must always believe that God will always answer your prayers. If you keep on praying, prayer do change everything. And sometimes you feel like maybe God doesn't listen to you. But remember, God has His own time. So you have to keep on praying. And any other woman out there must never get tired for the kids or the husband. They must just stay on their knees.
You know, God works in mysterious ways. He was pruning me, He was cutting me, He was preparing me. Or perhaps He wanted me to serve Him in a better way or in a more dedicated way. Even in hospital, like I said, I had a lot of invitations to become a preacher. But I had always these excuses, you know, dark and diving, coming up with excuses not to become a local preacher. And this mind, this thinking came upon me to say, isn't it what you are going through because you are disobedient to God? But then the mind would then go away, it would fade and say, no, God will never put you through this thing if you are a child of God. Up until today, it's something that I don't understand. But I can just be thankful to my family because they stood by my side. We are more closer than before. We are more obedient now to God than before. I believe that I'm serving a faithful God. Hence He put me through this. So that I can see the blessings that He had for me. My 4 grandchildren, my kids growing, my eldest son getting married, all those blessings. I think God spared my life so that I can see those blessings that He had for me. And I believe today that we are more closer, and it is my duty and responsibility, to attract and bring people to God so that they can know that He is faithful. He keeps His promises. God is a manifester of His word. He doesn't let you alone. And that is what I currently believe. I thank you.
A while ago, I grappled with the question of whether God is still resurrecting people from the dead. Well, I went to Him and I asked Him, and He answered me in an amazing way. The very next morning, somebody sent me a YouTube video of a medical doctor's testimony. What this doctor was saying, he was treating a patient who had a very serious heart attack, and the person flatlined, collapsed on the table or the bed where he was treating them, and he then used the defibrillator to shock this heartbeat back into rhythm, but it was not successful. He later on had to declare this man dead. As he was leaving this room where he was treating this patient, he got to the doors of the ward, and as he was about to open these doors, he heard this voice saying to him, "Go back and shock that man once more." Being a believer, thought about this voice, but he decided to ignore it and carry on. When he got to the main doors of the ward, again, as he was about to open it, that same voice repeated the instruction, "Go and shock this man once more." This time he thought he's going to be obedient. He went back and he shocked this patient once more, and this man was resuscitated. He came back to life. It reminded me of the story of Lazarus. But then 2 hours later on that same morning, I got a call from a very dear friend of mine, also a medical doctor. And he shared with me a story that happened during that night at a local hospital. He was saying there was this young teenage boy who died during the early hours of the morning, and whilst his parents were sitting outside the room where the body was lying, a stranger approached them in the passage, and he said to them, "Why are you crying?" And they explained to him that their son had passed. He asked whether he could go into the room. They allowed him. A few minutes later he came out and he said to them, "Your son is alive and well." They jumped up and ran into the room and found their son sitting up, alive and well. How do I know that these two stories are the work of God? Simple. I asked God the question, do you still resurrect people from the dead? Next morning he gave me these two stories. He answered my question. Then came the testimony of Bigboy Miller. Another similar story of a resurrection. Of a person who was dead and came back to life. I want to raise two other important points that came from this testimony of Bigboy this morning. The first one is the power of prayer. And the second one, the faith of the family. You see, it took me to Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6, where it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight." Undeniably, there is power in prayer. And there is power in faith. And we've seen it from the outcome of this testimony. Bigboy was brought back to life because of the prayers of his family and their faith. And God honored those prayers and their faith. And today this family is doing so much for him to glorify God and to build his kingdom. And they continue to sing hymn 516. When we walk with the Lord in the light of his word, what a glory he sheds on our way. While he do his good will, he abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there is no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. Thank you, Bigboy and your family, for sharing this testimony with us today. Amen.
And I couldn't believe that I've never seen it. I mean, I've done so many intensive stimulation with him that I've never seen these black spots. And when I saw it, I knew he couldn't see.
Is he going to be able to be a normal child, to run, to play, to climb a tree, to ride a bike? Is he going to be able to get a job? I remember telling Adele that, and she's more of a practical person, but you know, to me it felt as if I was hit to the floor. I remember breaking down several times, crying, and you know, it's just your whole dream about your child. It feels is gone.